promise you a couple of things. I will keep it short, and I will have tears. Those are givens. Anyway, just real quick, it's a note for my daughter. This is the reason I haven't spoken 5 years of doing this, because I didn't want to go through this. But I keep asking men to talk and stretch themselves and explain to them that God is worth being a little embarrassed over, being courageous over. And so I figured it's about my turn. Anyway, kind of a quick walk through my life. I'm going to probably throw most of these notes away. But so growing up, spent a lot of our time at work. We are in a family business, and it's kind of what we did. We worked hard and we played hard. Remember doing, if we wanted to be together as a family, we were together as a family at work. And I don't have any regrets over that. I love what I do. I love the people I work with. There's half a dozen guys in here that I work with and get to see every day. It's a privilege. I've got one brother. Gotta grab my glasses. I work with him every day. He's been out fighting cancer for about 10 months, and miss him being involved in that a lot. He's a huge part of the business and a huge part of my life. I grew up in a Christian home. Both of my parents came from Christian homes. God was no foreigner. As I grow up, I realize that there's always more to be gained and learned from God. And so my parents weren't perfect, but I saw them interact with each other and treat each other with grace. And something I took for granted, just a small thing, is, growing up, I always heard stories, kids talk at school and stories about their parents arguing, and I never once in my life heard my parents argue. I don't doubt they disagreed. I don't doubt things didn't always go well, and I know they weren't perfect, but I never heard my dad raise his voice at my mom, and I never heard my mom sass my dad. So, that being said, I'm thankful for that. Onik and I have kind of carried that on. We don't argue. It's maybe a double-edged sword because we don't argue well. We're both conflict avoiders, and that causes a lot of conflict. But it's hard to read your notes through tears and glasses. That as men, as we raise our families, that characteristics that you carry on, and I think of the fact that I didn't see my folks argue. My kids haven't seen us argue. That it gives my sons a model, and it gives my daughters kind of a litmus test of what they should and shouldn't put up with, and what's appropriate and what's not. But as men, it's our job to model that to the point where they know how to weed through the garbage of life. And haven't always been perfect at that. There's plenty of things that my kids will tackle life with and probably realize that there was a better way than what Dad did. A few years after high school, I'm kind of blowing through some of this, but a few years after high school, my mom died of cancer. She was 42 years old. I was 20 at the time. It was definitely something we didn't see coming. And at 22 years old, well, to back up a little bit, I had pretty good friends in high school, had some real good friends. We weren't totally destructive. We weren't throwing our lives down the drain. We weren't always living right for Christ. But most of the stupid things we did weren't destructive enough that we couldn't recover from them. And when I was about 22, looking back at my life, high school, at the end of high school, I would say the alcohol started. And kind of looking back, when I got to about 22 years old and after my mom passed away, and decided, hey, you know what, this might be time to kind of clean this stuff up. And looking back, I kind of decided that, hey, most of the things, if I had to take a sheet of paper and list my regrets, most of them started, if you keep looking back, with alcohol or something to do with alcohol. And I was a pretty slow learner, but I was smart enough to realize that, hey, maybe you go back to the beginning and eliminate the root of the problem, and you might be able to come out with a little better outcome. And I got married when I was 24. Annika was 19, so got a true cradle robber here. I bought her a wedding ring or an engagement ring for a graduation present. I wasn't about to sit around 4 more years. And so with that age gap, it looks a little bad when a 24-year-old starts dating a 19-year-old. And so my best friend in high school, Troy, his dating relationships always lasted about that long. And so I tried to convince Troy that he should ask Annika out, because I knew that now he would take the 19-year-old guff. It'd last about 3 weeks, and then I could date Annika, and everybody wouldn't give me any crap. So when I approached that, I said something to Troy, and he's like, "Are you kidding me? She's like 19." And so that didn't work. That was out of the picture. We had our first child, Braden, when I was in 99. I was 26 years old. We struggled a little bit to get pregnant, but it wasn't too bad, and kind of life moved on as we got ready to have another child. That didn't go so good. We went through IVF and IUI and doctor appointments and processes, and this drug on and on and on and on. And every time kind of wound up in failure. I was going to leave this part out, but can't with him sitting right here. As we struggled through that, talking about people coming alongside. I can remember kneeling in our living room with Larry and Bonnie praying over us. And at the time, I remember thinking, Lord, it's going to take you, because we aren't getting this done. And I just appreciate people like Larry that are never afraid to step out. Around this time, we're going to run 2 stories and intertwine them here, and they'll kind of come out in the end. Around this time, I met a guy, crazy circumstances, love to tell you, but it's a different story and a different day, but and started deer hunting. He's in the room today. I warned him yesterday. He said he was coming, and I said, you might not want to, because every biblical lesson I have has a deer story to go with it, and he's in most of my deer stories. Anyway, I met a guy that he was a big bow hunter, and I didn't understand that concept because I had shotgun hunted some and was pretty successful at it. And I thought, why would you possibly want to take 10 times longer to be half as effective? And then I tried it and definitely was hooked from the word go. Just the time of year and the activity of the animal. My focus switched from building my family to deer hunting. And this kind of went on and took a lot of different dynamic in it. But about that time, still struggling to have another child, and then Annika started talking about adoption. And I remember thinking, oh yeah, I'll run with this, because I know how much work that's going to be. And I was never worried. That I kind of kept thinking, you know what, someday it'll work out. And so Annika started talking about adoption, and I thought this will be perfect. This will tie up her time. Fall's coming. I'll be in the woods. She can do the paperwork. We'll be good. Anyway, our adoption agency we signed up with, you fill out a little portfolio, kind of make a little scrapbook, and they keep them there, and they present them to the birth moms as they come in, and they kind of look through, and everybody has their preference. I want the child that I'm leaving up for adoption, I want to have a sibling, or I want to live in the country. And so you kind of tell a little bit about yourself. And so we had a young couple in Omaha pick us as their adoptive parents, and we drove to Omaha and met them. They were a young teenage couple, and they had chosen us, and we kind of made arrangements and drove back home. And there were several months till the baby was going to be born, so we had time to plan. And then we got a call a couple weeks later, and they said, hey, could you come back out? Our parents would like to meet you guys. I said, all right, that's all right. I can understand that as a parent at the time of one. And I'm probably overly confident when it comes to people, that I thought, yeah, I can go out there and sell myself. These guys will be tickled pink. And so we packed up. Worst snowstorm I ever drove in. I remember there was 50 cars in the ditch between here and Omaha. We had probably 3-year-old Braden in the back at the time, and I remember sitting on interstate and standstill traffic and looking in my mirror and seeing a semi totally swung sideways, sliding down the hill towards us. Cars in the ditch on both sides, and we navigated through traffic and popped over the hill. I don't know what he ever hit, but he had to hit something. Anyway, and we got out there, and the social worker came and was supposed to meet us and pick us up and take us to dinner and meet this other couple. And she came and said, hey, I got bad news. They changed their mind. And so after a lot of tears, we kind of packed up our stuff and headed back home. But in that process, the state was kind of divided into a couple different districts. But the social worker from out there said, hey, if you don't mind, I'm going to keep your folder. I have somebody I want to show it to. And that somebody was Tyson's mom. So as we were being crushed, God was working. And so now we're a family of 4, a dad with 2 sons, proud as could be. And life kept moving on, and we signed up for adoption again, and it's kind of the same ritual, had a same folder, same everything, got another placement, and their policy was, or the Iowa law was, when birth mom has a baby, she can't sign away her rights for 48 hours. And then after 48 hours, she has 72 hours to revoke her decision. At least that's the way it was then. I don't know about now. Anyway, so a couple years later, we got another placement, a little girl named Katrina. And Annika had to stay in a motel because she wasn't allowed to leave the county at the time until the finalization, or not the finalization, until the time period had passed. And so the morning that I was supposed to go pick them up and bring them home, we got that phone call again. Mom changed her mind. So I packed the kids up and ran up to Annika so they could say goodbye. Tyson had been pretty young. Braden, I'm sure, knew what was happening. But so we come back home again, and life moved on. And probably 6 months later, we have another call that had 2 young boys, brothers. I believe they were 3 and 2. I might have that wrong. And came into our home. Things looked a lot more promising this time. And they were with us, and they had a lot of broken lives. It was obvious there was a lot of pain in that home. Birth dad had left, and mom was on her own and struggling with enough things that she couldn't do it anymore. Well, we brought those boys home, and everything was going good. I was a dad with 4 sons. I was thinking of retiring early. I had somebody to do everything that I needed done. I could go back to the woods where I wanted to be. And anyway, at the end of 6 months in Iowa, there's a finalization hearing where you don't even go, but the judge kind of makes a ruling and works with the attorney ad litem of the children. And we got a phone call and said, hey, we didn't realize where he was at, but birth dad showed up and protested. And the judge ruled in his favor, we're coming to get the boys. So I'm back to 2. Anyway, the process, I don't want to drag it out too long, but I want to get to some points at the end. The process of adoption, we signed up again, and we're fortunate enough to have Gabrielle. And that was awesome. We had been through enough that we didn't even tell the boys because they'd seen too much coming and going. And so at one point I dropped the boys off at Grandma's, and Annika and I went to town and came home with a baby. And I'm sure that the confusion, I was trying to save the kids, I probably just put on the kids. But anyway, Grandma was thrilled. I got to catch up where I'm at. I'll go back and kind of throw in some of the other side of the story. The hunting thing, when I look at the time that I spent and the things that I neglected, and I know there's a lot of deer hunters in the room. How many? Yeah. You know what time's about. And I don't want to have everybody, I'm not the guy bashing the deer hunter, trust me. But the time that we spent in the woods was definitely at a time in my life that, I should have been getting to know my wife, raising up my children. And, as the boys got older, it was great. The stress of kids got less because Braden and Tyson got big enough to help. I could start taking the kids along hunting. And so again, just more justification and more coping mechanisms that I would use. I can remember Braden. I bought a 3X pair of coveralls, and I would zip it down, and I would stick Braden in when he was about 3, zip him up, and over here at the campground, I don't know if you guys have seen it, the guys from Kalona, there's a 70-foot tower that we built to muzzleload hunt out of, and I would stuff him in those bibs, and I'd climb that 70-foot ladder and plop him on the ground with chicken and biscuits, Thomas the Train video, and a box of toys that didn't make noise. And he would stay from daylight till dark with me, and I can remember looking down at the floor thinking, I am the world's best dad. Anyway, I don't even know where I'm at in my notes anymore, but about the time Ashlyn was born, she was just a couple of months old. Jim, my hunting buddy Jim that was with me, we were hunting on a piece of property down by Coppic, and had the best night in the woods at the time ever. It was the first night out. I'd shot 3 deer, had my buck killed, and went to climb down out of the tree, and a tree peg popped out of the tree, and I slipped and fell. Where's Jim at? He's way in the back. You remember how far it was? Yeah, we had a tree in the corner of the property that we could see probably 100 acres, and we'd sit there early and kind of just see what was going on. And we had just, every year we put new bow ropes in and tie them on, and the rope we use has little numbers on it. And we had just put bow ropes up, and I hit the ground, and I had my phone in my pocket, which I never do. I always have it in my pack, but I was laying on my back and could tell it was best at the time if I didn't move. And I grabbed my phone and called Jim, which We never have cell reception down there back then, but I did. Again, a God thing. I called Jim and said, hey, I just fell. And the first thing he said was, because we had just put that rope up there, he said, man, that was 39 feet. I said, yeah, I'm aware of how far it was. And I said, I think I'm going to pass out. So if you could come this way. And he did at a high rate of speed. Anyway, by the end of the night, while he was laying there with me, or while he was there with me, he kind of gathered up my things, and I didn't want to call an ambulance, and I called Annika and told her I'd be a little late, and told her that I fell, but I didn't. She asked how far, and I told her not to worry about it, and she didn't. She ended up taking the kids and going to bed. I can remember falling, and everybody always says, oh, your life passes before your eyes, blah, 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 and that sounds like a bunch of hogwash, but I can remember, if I was an artist, I'd draw it, but vividly the pictures that went through my mind. I can remember the train of thought of waiting for the tree pegs to catch me in the throat. I can remember thinking of my new baby. And anyway, God was there that night, protected me, and by 6 o'clock the next morning, I limped out of the ER in a back brace. And I look back and I think, okay, God, you spared me. You tried to teach me some lessons. I know my time is focused, and my time is limited on this earth, and I need it to be focused. What would you have me do now? And like any good dad, I went and borrowed a crossbow so that I could go back to the woods the next weekend and fill my other tag. And so, looking back at that seemed like the tough thing to do. It's definitely what I wanted to do. And I sit there and think how God looks down at us and shakes his head sometimes, kind of says, man, what do I have to do to show you? I don't know what time it is. Anyway, I'll start wrapping this up. So from about 2000 to 2017, everything I did revolved around hunting. Annika had her hands full with the kids, enjoyed being a mom. She was born to be a mom. She's amazing at that. And I'd justify my actions, by taking the kids along. And I thought to myself, you wanted kids. We have kids. You have everything you want. Now I get to have everything I want. And being in the woods was where it was at for me. Anyway, from in that period of time, I put every bit of energy I had in a direction, and that direction we tend to get good at and get knowledge of and get to be experts in an area that we care about. And so the area I should have been caring about was getting to know my wife and my kids. And the area I was focused on was far from that. So as I look back, again, thinking of the provision side of it, I kept justifying myself as, Annika wanted kids, she has kids. She wanted to live in a big old remodeled farmhouse, we have that. I have her driving a nice car, I take her on a nice vacation. And, so I was checking my boxes. And meanwhile, God was just waiting. So in those crucial years that I was gone, I'd like to say, these are the lessons that I learned, but I guess to use the word learn pretty sparingly, because they're the lessons that I was taught, but not necessarily the lessons that were learned, because learning usually means retention, and my retention was short, and God had to get pretty specific with me. And so when I look back at the trade-off, Upstairs I have 4,083 inches of antler stuffed into 27 chunks of styrofoam, wrapped in hair. And I traded all that and risked my marriage and bringing up my kids. In both cases, they've been very graceful to me. They've been forgiving. I've tried to apologize to them and for neglecting the time that they needed me most. And that kind of, some of that leads up to what this is. When I started realizing what I'm doing and my lack of direction and importance of purpose is kind of where all this started. There was 5 guys in a Bible study that started getting together, and we would discuss marriage and children and relationships. And as we met, that was, like I say, about 5 years ago, and then we started talking about, hey, we should bring some friends. And so we each brought a friend, and then we each brought a friend, and then we would just kind of visit amongst ourselves and kind of leave here. And everybody loved it. We loved the conversation. And I had a guy confront me that used to come pretty regular. He said, you know, you got quite a few guys here, but you don't have a purpose. And he was right. So we started asking. I think Phil Gaiman was the first guy we had to talk, and it's pretty simple. 1 row of tables, and stand up behind your chair and give about a 5-minute talk. And it was good, and it grew. And kind of developed a little more of a passion to see men learn what men should be doing. And don't get me wrong, I still enjoy going to the woods, not near like I used to. But God created it. He gave it to us. It has its purpose. But I'll get to some of my points and let you guys get going. Something that, again, it's a pretty common passage, but when I think about the Matthew 28, you know, I always said, you know, when God said to go and make disciples, I kind of thought that means that I'm supposed to find a good church where a good pastor knows how to make disciples. And realizing that's about the farthest thing from the truth. I'm supposed to find a good church where a pastor knows how to take good men and make disciples of them. And so it is our job. It's really actually all we were called to do. We have one task on this earth, and that's it. Everything else is pretty much time fillers for us. Can't read my own writing. And another thing I guess I've learned, kind of been taught, back to the correct grammar there, that I've been taught but not learned completely, is that when God calls us to go, he never really promises what the return trip will look like. We tend to think if we go hard enough, it'll be a first-class ride back home. And Matthew 10:16, behold, I send you out as sheep among the midst of wolves. Be shrewd as serpents and innocent as doves. And Luke 10:3, go, behold, I send you out as lambs in the midst of wolves. And I read this thing and realize, you know, we think life gets tough and we kind of change the things we do so that things get easier. The fact is, we're sheep. The world is wolves. He knows it, and he sends us anyway. There's a good chance you're not coming back, or the ride back's not going to look as pretty as you think it's going to be. it's still what we were called to do. So, our sole purpose here is to direct and put others in front of Jesus. If Christ is sitting on this chair, my job is not to come out and fix Larry. I got two Larrys, this works out well. To fix Larry, my job is to come out, introduce myself to Larry, and walk him to Christ. Christ will take care of the rest. There's nothing else we need to do. We're the usher at the wedding. And sometimes we got to kind of weave through the crowd, and sometimes it's a little difficult. But the fact is that we're only there to guide from point A to point B. And we tend to think that it's an impossible task and that it's too much to ask and that we're not going to be good at it. But at the end of the day, that's all we're called to do. And so I guess I'm going to wrap up here a little bit. I got some more, but I can't see and we're running out of time. I wrote this out knowing I'd be in tears by the time I got to it. But guys, I got to be honest. There are tons of guys in here that I don't know your name. There are guys here, I might never know their name. But guess what? You're the one sitting next to them. Get started knowing their names. In John 15:12, my command is this: love each other as I loved you. And I sit here and think, what are we waiting for? And I know we're all going to go about our day today, and we'll go to our jobs, some of us that we love and some of us that we hate. And still at the end of the day, our purpose was to grab someone, usher them to their seat in front of Christ. I guess I got one more spot here. When we know these things, there's times that we know these things. We're taught. We know what's correct. And when we're taught things that we know are correct, some of the things we question, but as men, we usually test the water. We try it out, we come to a conclusion, and establish the information as fact. So we have a book full of promises, a historical record never been proven wrong. We're told over and over where to put our hope and our value. We study and we do the lesson, we work, and we often do the totally wrong thing. When I fell out of the tree, I fell, and I could tell you, this is the part I told you, the exact thoughts that were going through my head. And just the importance of being prepared for that fall or that time or your end or whatever God has next for you. But just the concept of learning the lesson, putting the lesson where it belonged, and living it out. And when I think of the training, I'll go back to a Jim story. Jim and I went to Idaho to a long-range shooting class. It was an absolute riot. But how many here know what Kentucky windage is? When something's way out there and you just hold a little bit high and you kind of hope. That's probably a little bit the way we hunted when we started. And anyway, that shooting class taught us something different. 3 or 4 days of an ex-military guy teaching us how to, what they call dope. You put dope on your scope and you range the animal, you know your gun, you do your ballistics, you do all this. And we went from winging it, Kentucky windage, to gathering the information, applying the information, and using the information. And so it was a great week. We spent airline tickets, hotels, time off work. We dumped our resources into gathering knowledge. And I remember soon after we got back, Jim and I were hunting. I still remember the window we were shooting out of. It's back in the before the smokeless powder days. But one of the bucks Jim was looking at stepped out. If I didn't have a gun, it must have been my tag was already full. But stepped out, and Jim put the gun out the window. I ranged the gun. He dialed the information, and we went through it. We learned our lesson. We have our information. We know the details. We know what to do with it. Jim pulled the trigger, and he was excited. He always gets a little excited. And smoke cloud goes. Before we can see, I look over, and Jim says, "He's way out there." He said, "I held just a little high." And I remember thinking to myself, we just spent a week, airline tickets, motels, drove through the night, ended up sharing a bed at that motel because it was the last one left. We did everything we knew to do, and then you held a little high. Needless to say, that deer is not on the wall upstairs. But my challenge to you is, you have the information, process the information, and use the information. And that's all I got for you today.